You are the Messiah, the Christ.
Was King Herod a Messiah? Did first century Jews think Herod was a Messiah? Let's investigate a little. In this video, I'll first give you 7 sources, potentially indicating some first century Jews thought a certain Herod was a Messiah. Then we'll investigate the nature and characteristics of the sources. Then, by good methods of historical analysis, we will make a determination regarding how confident we can be that some first century Jews thought Herod was a Messiah. Any claim that Herod was thought of as a Messiah derives from these following sources. I'll go through them chronologically. Number 1, the Gospel of Mark, written circa 70 CE by an unknown author. Mark chapter 3, verse 6 reads, "Immediately the Pharisees went out and started plotting with the Herodians against him, how they might kill him." Unquote. And then in Mark chapter 12, verse 13, we read, "Then they sent some of the Pharisees and the Herodians to Jesus to trap him in his words." Unquote. Source number 2 is the Gospel of Matthew, written circa 85 CE by an unknown author. Matthew chapter 22, verse 16 reads, "So they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians." Unquote. Source number 3 is a work called Against All Heresies, written circa 200 CE by an unknown author that we like to call pseudo-Tertullian. Chapter 1, verse 1 of that work reads, "The Pharisees I pretermit, who were divided from the Jews by their superimposing of certain addendums to the law, which fact likewise made them worthy of receiving this very name. And together with them, the Herodians likewise, who said that Herod was Christ." And that's the Thelwall translation. Source number 4 is the Panarion, written between 374 CE to 378 CE by Bishop Epiphanius of Salamis. Book 1, Section 1, verse 20 and 1 reads, "Herodians, who were Jews in all respects, but thought that Herod was Christ, and awarded the honor and name of Christ to him." Unquote. Also, in Book 1, Section 1, subsection 20, verses 1 and 1 through 1 and 2, read, "And again, after this sect and the others, there was a 7th, called the sect of Herodians. These had nothing different, but were altogether Jews, good for nothing, and hypocrites. They believed, however, that Herod was Christ, thought that Christ awaited in all scriptures of the law and prophets was Herod himself, and were proud of Herod because they were deceived about him." Unquote. Source number 5 is Dialogue Against the Luciferians, written circa 379 CE by Jerome. Verse 23 reads, "I say nothing of the Herodians who accepted Herod as the Christ." Unquote. Source number 6 is a work titled Book of Different Heresies, written circa 384 CE by Philastrius Brixiensis. Chapter 28, verse 1 of this work reads, "Others are Herodians from Herod, the so-called king of the Jews. These confess the resurrection, they receive the law and the prophets, but Herod, king of the Jews, slain by the angel, they wait for him as those who hope for Christ." Unquote. Source number 7 is the Jewish War in the Slavonic tradition, written at an unknown time based on work by Josephus. If you are just listening to the audio of this but are interested in the exact citations for all these sources, make sure to check the description, or you can look at the video as well. I'm putting them here on the video. Book 6, chapter 5, verse 4 reads, "But they were impelled to make war by an ambiguous prediction found in the sacred books, saying that in those times someone from the Judean land would be reigning over the whole world. For this there are various explanations. For some thought it meant Herod, others the crucified miracle worker Jesus, others Vespasian." Unquote. So I've just laid out all the sources. Now let's go back and evaluate the nature and characteristics of these sources. We're going to look at sources 1 and 2. Number 1, the Gospel of Mark. Number 2, the Gospel of Matthew. All these sources do is tell us there was a group called the Herodians in the early 1st century. It doesn't matter that we don't know who the authors were, or that we don't know that the author knew any Herodians. or spoke with anyone who personally knew any Herodians. They just tell us that there was a group there called the Herodians, but no details, unfortunately, of what they thought. Next, let's look at source number 3, Against All Heresies by Pseudo-Tertullian, by an unknown author. We don't know who was writing as Tertullian here. But this source is not very good because the author didn't know any of these Herodians. The author doesn't cite his source, so we don't know that he had any source. We don't know who the author is, and the work is not contemporaneous with the people that it describes. This author was writing circa 200 CE. It was written 150 years after these Herodians lived. Now let's take a look at sources 4 through 6 together. The nature and characteristics of these sources are all similar. Source number 4 is the Panarion. Source number 5 is the Dialogue Against the Luciferians. And source number 6 is the Book of Different Heresies. These sources are not very good, not very beneficial for us as we try to determine what the Herodians thought, what they believed, for a few different reasons. Number 1 being that neither of these authors knew any Herodians personally. Number 2, these authors did not cite any of their sources, so we don't know if they had any sources. And the work is not contemporaneous with that group, the Herodians in question. They were written 300 plus years after the group of Herodians lived. Let's move on to source number 7, Josephus in the Slavonic tradition. This source and its nature is more complex than the other sources. The original text here was written by Josephus circa 75 CE, but the Slavonic tradition is a much later tradition, which includes text that is not present in the more original Greek tradition. In this particular verse, the more original Greek tradition reads, "But what more than all else incited them to war was an ambiguous oracle, likewise found in their sacred scriptures, to the effect that at the time one from their country would become ruler of the world. This they understood to mean someone of their own race, and many of their wise men went astray in their interpretation of it. The oracle, however, in reality signified the sovereignty of Vespasian, who was proclaimed emperor on Jewish soil," unquote. That's the translation by Thackeray in the Greek tradition found in the Loeb Classical Library. So as you can see there is no mention of Herod or Jesus. Slavonic Josephus is unique in that way. I might do a video in the future focused on the Greek versus Slavonic Josephus, so make sure to keep an eye out for that video in the future. It's really so fun to dive into these sources and look at what the ancients wrote. I absolutely love looking at this stuff. Ultimately, in my analysis, we cannot be confident that this group of first century people called Herodians thought Herod was a Messiah. The sources supporting this claim are all secondary sources, significantly lacking in credibility regarding that claim. Now, history is notoriously difficult to deal with. It's extremely hard to know for certain or with a high level of confidence that anything happened in history. We weren't there. No one alive today was alive back then to tell us what happened. All we have are texts, and assuredly there are texts that are missing that we don't have anymore. That's 100% factual. With regard to this particular issue, perhaps there are texts that we don't have anymore. Perhaps these people did have sources that they did not name that were associated with a time or written by Herodians themselves. We're not sure. So it's very possible that some people thought Herod was the Messiah, but because we only have these sources and we have to go by the evidence, we simply cannot believe at this moment without further evidence that the Herodians thought Herod was a Messiah.